Do you ever think about those things, funny now, but so normal in the 1970s? Back then, habits, fashions, and kitchen trends shaped daily life in ways we barely questioned, because everyone around us did the same. How did something once so ordinary become almost unthinkable today? Avocado green appliances were once the crown jewel of a fashionable kitchen, but looking back, you have to wonder what people were thinking. Entire refrigerators, stoves, and even blenders came in that one shade of green, a color that fell somewhere between swamp moss and army surplus. At the time, though, it was considered sleek, bold, and cutting edge. Magazines praised it as modern and fresh, a color that reflected nature and the earth. Housewives proudly posed next to avocado green dishwashers in advertisements, as if this bold hue somehow meant their cooking would taste better. Kitchens became shrines to the color, especially when paired with matching curtains or wallpaper that only made the green seem louder. Friends and neighbors would come over, nod approvingly, and comment on how up-to-date the home looked, never daring to call it what it really was: overwhelming. Still, avocado green held on for years, showing up in nearly every household at some point. Now, it feels more like a joke than a design choice, the kind of thing you laugh about when flipping through old family photos. But back then, in the middle of the 1970s, having avocado appliances meant you were keeping up with the times, even if those times look swampy to us now. Harvest Gold refrigerators and ovens were the other heavyweight in the battle of 1970s kitchen colors, and they were just as loud as avocado green. Imagine walking into a kitchen where everything glowed in shades of mustard, from the fridge to the oven to the countertops. It was supposed to feel warm and cheerful, like bringing sunshine indoors. But in reality, it often looked more like you were cooking inside a giant jar of mustard. Still, Harvest Gold was praised in glossy catalogs as elegant and stylish, a rich contrast to the stainless steel we know today. Families decorated entire kitchens around it, pairing it with dark wood cabinets, linoleum floors, and patterned wallpaper that only made the gold stand out more. The funny part is, people genuinely loved it. They thought it made their homes modern and chic. Friends envied those who had the newest Harvest Gold oven, as if cooking a roast in yellow somehow made it taste better. Today, of course, most people would rip it out in a heartbeat. But back then, it was the definition of cool, proving once again that what feels normal in one era can look hilarious just a few decades later. Plastic couch covers were a special kind of torture disguised as practical. Families bought beautiful sofas, often in bold patterns or rich fabrics, and then immediately hid them under crinkly sheets of plastic. The idea was simple: protect the furniture so it stayed pristine. But the reality? No one could sit comfortably without squeaking, sticking, or sliding right off the couch. Summer afternoons were the worst. Your legs would cling to the plastic, leaving imprints like a piece of pressed ham. Parents, though, insisted it was necessary. They wanted the couch to last for years, maybe even decades, as if people were going to tour the house to admire untouched upholstery. Guests were too polite to say anything, but everyone silently wished the covers would disappear. Kids hated them, adults tolerated them, and yet the trend spread far and wide. Looking back, it is funny that families spent so much effort buying nice furniture only to make sure nobody could enjoy it. Plastic couch covers were less about comfort and more about control, and they turned many living rooms into squeaky, sticky museums. Carpeted bathrooms might just be the strangest design choice of the 1970s, and yet at the time, they were considered luxurious. People thought carpeting would make bathrooms warmer, softer, and more inviting, a cozy place instead of a sterile tiled room. The problem was obvious: water. Every splash from the sink, every drip from the tub, and every accidental overflow soaked straight into that carpet, leaving behind dampness that never really went away. Mold and mildew thrived, but families convinced themselves it was worth it for the comfort. Advertisements showed glamorous bathrooms with plush shag carpeting right up to the toilet, as if nothing about that setup could possibly go wrong. Guests walked in, eyebrows raised, but nobody dared to question the trend because it was everywhere. Families even matched bathroom carpets to their avocado green or harvest gold color schemes, completing the picture of 1970s elegance. Looking back now, it is amazing that this idea lasted as long as it did. Carpeted bathrooms seemed stylish and cozy in their day, but now they are just one big punchline from the decade of questionable design. Gelatin molds with savory fillings were the pinnacle of dinner party sophistication in the 1970s, and also some of the strangest food combinations you can imagine. Bright, wobbly towers of gelatin would be unveiled with pride, shimmering under the dining room lights. Inside, instead of fruit, you might find shrimp, vegetables, or even slices of hot dogs suspended like fossils in amber. Hosts thought they looked artistic, modern, and impressive, proof that they had mastered the latest culinary trend. Guests, however, often sat politely, trying to smile as they poked at a quivering slice filled with mystery chunks. Recipe books of the time were filled with gelatin salads that combined mayonnaise, tuna, and lime gelatin, dishes that sound more like dares than delicacies. But at the time, they were completely normal, expected even, at family gatherings or potlucks. Children dreaded them, adults endured them, and hosts proudly defended them as cutting-edge cuisine. Today, those recipes have become the stuff of retro cookbooks and internet jokes, but in the 1970s, a good gelatin mold was considered the height of hospitality. Rotary phones on the wall were as common in the 1970s as smartphones are today. The phone was often mounted in the kitchen, tethered by a cord that never stretched quite far enough. You could pace in circles, wrapping the cord around your fingers, but you could not escape its reach. Privacy was nearly impossible. If you wanted to talk to a friend, you did it with your entire family in earshot. Dialing itself was a task, spinning each number slowly and waiting for the wheel to click back before moving to the next. Misdial a digit, and you had to start over. Yet at the time, no one complained. Families organized their entire communication around that one-wall phone, waiting their turn and sometimes arguing over who got to use it next. Teenagers stretched the cord into another room for a little privacy, while parents called out reminders that dinner was ready. Looking back now, the idea of being physically tied to the wall just to talk seems laughable, but in the 1970s, that phone was the heart of the household. Television remotes were not always handheld gadgets. In many households of the 1970s, the remote was the kids. Parents would sit in their favorite chair, sigh, and shout, "Change it to Channel 4!" And the kids, obedient and often grumbling, would hop up and twist the dial on the television. It became a routine, part of the rhythm of watching television together. Families only had a handful of channels anyway, so the job did not require much effort, but children still resented being the stand-in technology. Parents thought nothing of it. It was simply practical. Kids rolled their eyes, but they knew better than to argue. The phrase, "I am not your remote," did not exist yet, because that was exactly what children were. Today, it is funny to imagine that parents once delegated channel changing to their kids like a household chore. But in the 1970s, it was perfectly normal. Another reminder of how much the world has changed in just a few decades. Ashtrays on every table were not just common, they were expected. Smoking was everywhere in the 1970s, from living rooms to restaurants to airplanes. Coffee tables had ashtrays beside the magazines, dining tables had one near the salt and pepper, and even bedrooms sometimes had them on nightstands. They came in every design imaginable: glass, ceramic, metal, even decorative shapes meant to blend with home decor. Guests automatically lit cigarettes upon sitting down, and hosts made sure there was always a place to tap ash or stub out the filter. Children grew up watching smoke curl around lampshades, breathing it in without a second thought. At the time, it was not seen as harmful. It was simply part of everyday life. Today, it is shocking to think of smoke filling restaurants and homes, but back then, ashtrays were as normal as drinking glasses. Families considered them an essential accessory, a sign of hospitality, and a small but constant reminder of how different the world was only a few decades ago. Waterbeds in the bedroom were considered futuristic, stylish, and downright cool in the 1970s. The idea of sleeping on a bed filled with water seemed revolutionary, a sign that you were ahead of the curve. Couples bragged about them, advertisements promised better sleep, and kids begged their parents to get one. At first it was exciting, the gentle slosh of water, the feeling of floating as you tried to drift off. But reality hit quickly. Waterbeds were heavy, difficult to move, and prone to leaks that could soak carpets and ruin entire bedrooms overnight. Heating systems often broke, leaving sleepers shivering on icy, water-filled mattresses. Still, for a time, they were a badge of status, proof that your household was modern and trendy. Friends flopped onto them with curiosity, laughing as the waves rippled across the mattress. Looking back, it is funny how impractical they really were. But in the 1970s, waterbeds were the ultimate in bedroom fashion, even if they came with more headaches than sweet dreams. Wood paneling everywhere was the decorating choice of the decade, turning countless homes into brown-toned caves. Basements, dens, and even kitchens were lined with sheets of faux wood that made every room feel darker than it should have. Families thought it looked warm, cozy, and rustic, a throwback to simpler times. In reality, it often made spaces feel small, closed in, and strangely artificial. Paneling was cheap, easy to install, and heavily marketed as the solution for quick home makeovers. As a result, it spread like wildfire, appearing in nearly every suburban neighborhood. Families showed it off proudly, convinced their homes now had character. Kids grew up staring at endless wood grain patterns, some even doodling on them when parents were not looking. Decades later, paneling is often the first thing ripped out during renovations. But in the 1970s, it was embraced as the height of style. Looking back now, it feels more like a design punchline, but at the time, wood paneling was considered perfectly normal. Funny to us now, but the peak of taste back then. Beehive hairdryers at home were like mini beauty salons planted right in the bathroom. These giant dome-shaped machines sat over your head, humming loudly while hot air blasted down, baking every strand into place. They looked futuristic at the time, like something out of a spaceship, but in reality, they took forever to actually dry your hair. Women sat beneath them, flipping through magazines, waiting impatiently, while kids peeked around the corner, fascinated by the strange helmet contraption. The smell of hairspray always lingered in the air, mixing with the hot plastic scent of the dryer itself. Kids dared each other to stick their hands under the hood just to feel the rush of heat, only to be shooed away by their mothers. And every household had at least one family photo where someone's hair looked like it had been frozen mid-explosion after sitting under the thing too long. The sound was so loud you could not hold a proper conversation, so households became quiet whenever the dryer roared to life. Friends came over to try it, giggling while their hair puffed up into stiff clouds of hairspray and curls. The machine made bathrooms look like salons, complete with the smell of shampoo and burnt hair. Owning one was a badge of style, a promise that you took beauty seriously. Today they feel more like museum pieces, the kind of thing you only see in retro photos, but in the 1970s, they were a fixture of everyday grooming. Sliding glass doors with beaded curtains were one of those fun design choices that ended up being more trouble than they were worth. The idea was simple: hang strands of colorful beads in the doorway for a groovy, relaxed vibe. But in reality, those beads clattered and tangled every time someone walked through. Kids ran face-first into them, pets got caught, and visitors were left brushing beads out of their hair while pretending not to be annoyed. Every so often a strand would snap, sending beads scattering across the floor like marbles, creating more chaos than charm. The clicking sound of beads became a soundtrack in many homes, clattering endlessly as kids ran back and forth. And yet, despite the annoyance, people thought they looked cool, like they had brought home a piece of the counterculture without actually moving to California. The sound of beads clicking together became the background music of many homes, a constant reminder that privacy was impossible. Still, families loved them. They felt stylish, exotic, and modern, as if you had transformed your house into a bohemian hideaway. In the moment, nobody cared about the inconvenience. They cared about the look. Beaded curtains became symbols of the decade's free-spirited style, even if they also doubled as traps for anyone trying to get from the kitchen to the patio. Brown-tinted glassware was another strange but normal staple of 1970s kitchens. Every cup, bowl, and plate seemed to be made of thick, smoky brown glass that always looked like it belonged in a bar. Families poured milk, orange juice, and even Kool-Aid into glasses that looked permanently stained, giving every drink the vibe of a late-night cocktail. The appeal was supposed to be sophistication, dark tones that matched with the earth-colored decor of the decade. Opening kitchen cabinets felt like peering into a lounge after hours, rows of amber glasses stacked neatly like barware. They were heavy, clunky, and awkward for small hands, but no kid in the 1970s escaped drinking grape juice out of one. And when the sunlight hit them just right, they cast a strange brown glow across the table, making breakfast look far more dramatic than it really was. They were sturdy too, often heavy enough to survive being dropped on the counter. Guests sipped from them without complaint, though kids often wrinkled their noses, wishing for something brighter and more cheerful. Sets of brown-tinted dishes were wedding gifts, hand-me-downs, and family staples, sticking around long after the fashion had faded. Today, they seem gloomy and outdated, but at the time, they were considered stylish and modern. They turned every kitchen into a smoky lounge, whether you wanted it or not. Orange Formica counters lit up kitchens with an intensity that was impossible to ignore. Bright, bold, and unapologetic, these countertops clashed with just about everything else in the room. Families loved them because they were durable, easy to clean, and, most importantly, in style. Interior magazines described them as cheerful and energetic, a perfect match for the busy pace of modern households. Mothers bragged about how easily spills wiped away, even if the counters made every kitchen look like a construction zone in mid-paint. Kids spread out homework or board games across their glowing orange surface, making it the real centerpiece of family life. And somehow, no matter how chaotic the colors got, every family photo taken in the kitchen still had those counters blazing in the background like a neon sign. But looking back, it feels like someone accidentally spilled paint and decided to call it fashionable. Kitchens glowed with orange counters paired with avocado appliances, dark wood cabinets, and patterned linoleum, creating a dizzying effect that somehow worked back then. Friends would visit and marvel at how fresh it looked, even if secretly they were thinking it looked more like a pumpkin patch exploded. Still, Orange Formica represented the bold confidence of the decade when color knew no limits. Today it makes people laugh, but in the 1970s, it made kitchens feel alive. Harvest Gold or Avocado televisions were proof that the kitchen colors had spilled over into the living room. That is right. Televisions came in shades of mustard yellow or swampy green, blending in with appliances rather than standing out as entertainment. Families gathered around glowing screens that clashed loudly with the furniture, but nobody complained. It was considered stylish to have your television match your fridge, as if entertainment and cooking needed to coordinate. Kids sprawled out on shag carpeting, staring up at sitcoms framed by a mustard rectangle. Parents dusted the bulky sets proudly, as if the color itself made the picture clearer. And every home seemed to have at least one family portrait with everyone gathered in front of their gold or green television, beaming like it was the crown jewel of the house. The bulky sets sat on shag carpet, surrounded by wood paneling, looking more like furniture than technology. Remote controls were rare, so families twisted the dials by hand, all while admiring the colorful frame around the black and white or early color broadcasts. These televisions seemed futuristic at the time, proof that homes were keeping up with modern life. Today, the idea of a mustard-colored television sounds like a punchline, but in the 1970s, it was perfectly normal, and even envied. Console stereos the size of furniture were the pride of many living rooms. These enormous wooden cabinets stretched across entire walls, holding radios, record players, and sometimes even televisions. Families arranged couches and chairs around them like altars to music and entertainment. They doubled as sideboards too, with family photos, flower vases, and even lamps balanced on top, making them part stereo and part display case. Opening the heavy lid felt ceremonial, like unlocking a treasure chest that held the soundtrack of the household. When the music started, it was not just heard. It was felt, rolling through the walls and vibrating the floor. When a record dropped onto the turntable, the whole house filled with sound, and suddenly everyone felt modern and connected. Parents bragged about owning the latest console, showing it off to guests as if it were fine furniture. Kids leaned against it while doing homework, letting the bass rumble through their bones. The funny part is, most of the bulk was just empty space, more for looks than function. Still, these consoles defined an era when entertainment was meant to be displayed, not hidden. Today, they seem absurdly oversized compared to a tiny Bluetooth speaker, but in the 1970s, a massive console stereo was a centerpiece of family life. Fondue sets at dinner parties were the definition of sophistication, at least according to 1970s standards. Guests gathered around bubbling pots of melted cheese or chocolate, dipping bread, fruit, or meat with long skewers. The act itself was more about the fun than the food, everyone laughing as they dripped, dunked, and occasionally lost a piece at the bottom of the pot. Some families even had entire tables built around the fondue pot, complete with colored forks so no one mixed theirs up. Advertisements showed glamorous hosts smiling effortlessly, but in reality, someone always burned their tongue or dripped cheese down their shirt. It was messy, unpredictable, and chaotic. But that chaos was part of the charm. Families bought fondue sets proudly, breaking them out whenever company came over. Advertisements promised it was the ultimate in modern entertaining, a way to make your home feel cosmopolitan. Kids loved the chocolate versions. Parents preferred the cheese, and guests walked away with sticky fingers and big smiles. Today, fondue feels more like a novelty, but back then it was taken seriously. If you wanted to prove you were up to date, you melted a pot of cheese, handed out forks, and called it a party. Television dinners in foil trays felt like the future served right on your lap. Families marveled at the convenience. A full meal ready after just a short wait in the oven. Each tray was divided into sections, meat in one corner, peas in another, dessert tucked neatly at the end. Opening the foil was like unwrapping a gift, steam rushing out in a puff that carried the smell of artificial gravy and reheated peas. The divided section seemed neat and futuristic, but in reality, the mashed potatoes always leaked into the corn. And yet kids thought it was magic, as if science itself had delivered dinner straight to the living room. The reality, of course, was a little less perfect. The meat was often half burned, the vegetables mushy, and the dessert scalding hot on top, but frozen in the middle. Still, people loved them. Sitting on the couch with a tray in hand, watching television together, felt modern and exciting. Kids begged for them, parents gave in on weekends, and families convinced themselves the food tasted better than it really did. Looking back, television dinners were more about the experience than the flavor. They were futuristic at the time, even if they are laughably ordinary now. Aluminum ice cube trays with levers turned making ice into a small battle. You filled the tray with water, slid it into the freezer, and waited patiently. But when it came time to get the cubes out, the real struggle began. The lever squealed and groaned as you pulled, like metal grinding on metal, and it always felt like it might snap in two. Kids begged to do it, only to scream when their fingers got pinched between the moving parts. No family gathering was complete without someone wrestling with the tray, ice flying everywhere as laughter filled the kitchen. The lever required brute strength to pull, often sending shards of ice flying across the kitchen. Fingers got pinched, cubes cracked in half, and sometimes the whole tray bent under the pressure. Yet every household had them, and no one questioned the design. Guests were offered drinks with cubes proudly popped from the tray, no matter how jagged they looked. Eventually, plastic trays replaced them, but aluminum trays lasted for years, heavy, noisy, and stubborn. Today, they are a retro curiosity, but in the 1970s, they were simply part of daily life. Normal then, funny now. Metal lunchboxes with cartoon heroes were more than just containers for sandwiches. They were badges of childhood identity. Heavy and sturdy, they often carried dents from being slammed into lockers or dropped on playgrounds. Kids showed off their favorites proudly. Superheroes, cartoon characters, or television stars decorated the sides. The designs faded and scratched over time, but the more worn a lunchbox looked, the more stories it carried. The sound of the metal latch snapping shut in the morning was as much a part of school as the bell ringing, and that matching thermos, even when it leaked, made the set feel complete, like you had your own personalized treasure chest. The matching thermos inside always seemed to leak, leaving everything slightly soggy, but no one cared. These boxes were conversation starters, status symbols, and reliable companions through years of school. Parents loved them because they lasted forever, even if they weighed nearly as much as the food inside. Looking back, it is funny that something so heavy and impractical was considered essential. But in the 1970s, metal lunchboxes were a rite of passage for every kid. Wood-burning stoves as modern heating might sound strange now, but in the 1970s, families proudly embraced them as if they were cutting-edge technology. The country was going through an energy crisis, and many households turned back to these rustic cast-iron stoves with the kind of pride you would normally reserve for a brand-new gadget. Magazines called them efficient, cozy, and forward-thinking, even though they were really a throwback to pioneer days. Families installed them in basements, kitchens, and living rooms, carefully stacking wood beside them as if the pile itself was part of the decor. They heated up rooms unevenly, roasting hot if you sat too close, freezing if you sat too far. But people loved them anyway. Kids were told to be careful around them, though inevitably someone touched the metal and learned a painful lesson. The smell of burning wood filled homes, seeping into curtains, clothes, and hair. But instead of complaining, people associated it with warmth and security. Neighbors traded firewood, dads took pride in chopping logs, and moms learned to balance cooking on top of a stove that seemed temperamental at best. Looking back, it is funny that a piece of technology straight out of the 1800s was marketed as modern, but in the 1970s, a wood-burning stove was a symbol of independence, practicality, and style all rolled into one. Big hair dryers with hoods were another piece of home life that felt futuristic in the 1970s but looks comical today. These machines were essentially plastic domes attached to a base that blew hot air down over your head. Sitting under one made you look like you were preparing for space travel rather than styling your hair. Women set them up in bedrooms and bathrooms, dragging long cords across the floor to reach a plug, then sat in chairs flipping through magazines while the machine hummed like an engine. They took forever, sometimes more than an hour, and the noise made normal conversation impossible. Kids peeked around the door, giggling at their mothers or sisters sitting trapped under what looked like a giant helmet. Despite the inconvenience, families saw them as glamorous, a way to recreate salon experiences without leaving home. Advertisements promised they were modern and chic, a must-have for the fashionable woman. In reality, they were bulky, loud, and often overheated, leaving hair frizzy instead of smooth. Today, they are little more than retro curiosities, but in the 1970s, sitting under a big plastic hood to dry your hair was as normal as brushing your teeth. Vinyl-padded kitchen chairs were the throne of every family dining room in the 1970s, and they were memorable for all the wrong reasons. Covered in shiny, sticky vinyl, these chairs clung to your skin like glue during hot summer meals. Sit down in shorts, and when you stood up, the chair practically tried to take you with it. The squeak of skin peeling off vinyl was the soundtrack of family dinners. Despite this, parents swore by them because they were easy to clean. Spills wiped right off, no stains, no fuss, and no extra laundry. The chairs often came in bright colors, orange, avocado green, or mustard yellow, that clashed wonderfully with the rest of the kitchen decor. They were usually paired with chrome-trimmed tables completing the picture of modern design. Guests politely shifted in their seats, trying not to slide, while kids swung back and forth on them until the screws loosened. Everyone has a memory of those chairs sticking, squeaking, or wobbling under them, but at the time, nobody thought twice about it. Vinyl-padded chairs were practical, popular, and perfectly normal, even if they made every summer dinner feel like a wrestling match with the furniture. Chrome trim on everything was the 1970s idea of sleek, futuristic style. Kitchen tables had chrome edges that glinted under fluorescent lights. Chairs had chrome legs that squeaked against linoleum floors, and even appliances showed off shiny strips of metal like jewelry. Families thought chrome made everything look cleaner, sharper, and more sophisticated. It was marketed as the perfect way to bring modern design into the home, and people embraced it wholeheartedly. The truth, of course, was that chrome scratched easily, collected fingerprints, and often looked tacky rather than stylish. Still, in the moment, nobody cared. Families polished chrome surfaces with pride, showing them off to neighbors who nodded approvingly. The shine caught your eye everywhere, from diner booths to family kitchens, and it seemed like the entire decade was dipped in silver. Today, chrome trim feels excessive, even comical. But in the 1970s, it was a status symbol, proof that your home was keeping up with the times. Party lines on the telephone were one of those quirks of the 1970s that seem unbelievable now, but were completely ordinary back then. A party line meant that multiple households shared the same phone connection, all tied together by one line. Pick up the receiver, and you might hear your neighbor in the middle of a conversation. Etiquette said you were supposed to hang up and wait your turn, but curiosity often got the better of people. Eavesdropping was an open secret, and kids especially loved picking up quietly just to listen in on gossip. Families scheduled calls carefully, knowing that others might be waiting to use the line, and arguments sometimes broke out over who was hogging the phone. Teenagers found it maddening. They wanted privacy, but could not escape the shared system. Parents tolerated it as just part of life, even when neighbors got nosy. Advertisements promised party lines kept costs down, but they also created endless awkward moments. Looking back, it is almost funny to imagine sharing your most personal conversations with half the neighborhood, but in the 1970s, party lines were considered normal, practical, and sometimes even entertaining. Hypercolor shirts were science, fashion, and bragging rights rolled into one magical piece of clothing. They changed color with heat, literal thermochromatic alchemy, and for a short time, that made them the coolest thing you could wear. You would walk into class with a bright purple shirt, and by lunchtime it had splotches of blue or pink wherever your body gave off heat. Did it look weird? Yes. Did we care? Not at all. You wanted those sweaty handprints, the blotches under the arms, the fingerprints across the chest. It meant your shirt worked. It meant you had style. You would press a hot mug against the fabric just to see the colors morph like lava lamp goo. And sure, after a few washes, the magic started to fade and your shirt just looked off. But the short time it lasted, Hypercolor was like owning wearable technology before that was even a phrase. It was futuristic and silly at the same time. Parents hated it. Teachers thought it was distracting. That just made us want more. And the real kicker? Hypercolor shirts actually encouraged sweat stains, on purpose. If that does not sum up the chaotic energy of the 1980s, I do not know what does. Farrah Fawcett's feathered hair was not just a style. It was a commitment. Everyone wanted that soft, perfectly sprayed cascade of waves flipping away from the face. And everyone tried. You teased, you curled, you basically turned your bathroom into a low-grade chemical testing site. The hairspray cloud was so thick you could lose a sibling in it. Combs broke, mirrors fogged. You kept going. You were not just styling, you were sculpting. At least one person got grounded for using Dad's entire can of mousse. You sprayed until the room fogged. The goal was volume. The result was often chaos. If your bangs drooped, you failed. If you could pass a comb straight through it, you failed harder. Girls stood in bathrooms with 3 mirrors and a can of Aquanet, silently praying to the gods of glamour. Even some boys gave it a shot. Farrah's poster in the red swimsuit made her the decade's most iconic beauty, but it was the hair that had everyone panicking before school. Your friend got it right once, and she became a legend for 2 whole weeks. Feathered hair was a rite of passage, a symbol of cool and a literal fire hazard near candles. And we still talk about it. Because Farrah did not just flip her hair, she flipped the whole nation with it. In the 1970s, Jell-O was not just a dessert, it was a lifestyle. And somewhere along the way, someone decided everything should go inside it. Tuna? Sure. Shredded carrots? Absolutely. Hot dogs? Why not? Dinner turned into a game of what horrifying thing will jiggle at me tonight. There were whole cookbooks dedicated to savory gelatin molds, complete with color photos that made you question reality. A popular one involved lime Jell-O, cottage cheese, chopped celery, and canned pineapple, served in a bundt pan. This was called a salad. There was something called aspic, which is French for meat Jell-O, and it involved beef broth gelatin with olives, peas, and ham cubes floating like forgotten dreams. People brought these to parties proudly. They unmolded them with a flourish. "Try the shrimp mold," they would say, as if that were not a culinary cry for help. And yet, somehow, it was normal. It was fashionable. Kids poked at it. Adults smiled through bites. If you were lucky, dessert Jell-O showed up later, with marshmallows and whipped cream, not sardines. But until then, you endured layer after layer of mysterious, wiggling ambition. Jell-O was a texture, a color, a prank hiding in plain sight. And in the 1970s, it was everywhere. Homemade toys and games were stitched, nailed, folded, and built from whatever was lying around the house. You did not walk into toy stores with a wish list. You walked into the backyard with a stick and your imagination. A cardboard box became a spaceship. A broom handle turned into a sword. Marbles, bottle caps, socks rolled into balls. Anything became part of the fun. You made slingshots from rubber bands and clothespins, dollhouses from cereal boxes, race cars out of scrap wood. You played outside until the streetlights came on, inventing rules as you went. Nothing was battery-powered. Everything ran on creativity. If a toy broke, you fixed it with tape, or wire, or glue stolen from your sister's school supplies. You did not have shelves of action figures or dolls. You had one, maybe two, that you treated like royalty. Board games were played with missing pieces and handwritten cards. But no one cared. The point was play, not perfection. And in making your own fun, you learned more than any store-bought toy could teach you. You learned how to create, how to pretend, how to turn nothing into everything. That kind of magic did not come in a box, it came from you. Summer heat was not battled. It was endured. Air conditioning was for rich people, department stores, and maybe the library. At home, you shoved a fan in the window and hoped it would suck in cool air. If the fan was old, it made more noise than wind, but that was still better than nothing. You flipped it around, tried every angle, put bowls of ice in front of it like some kind of home science experiment. Sometimes it worked. Usually, it just blew hot air in your face while rattling like a lawnmower. You rotated it between rooms like a precious relic, and if someone moved it without asking, prepare for war. At night, you prayed for a breeze. You slept with no sheets. You sweat into the pillow. And if you had siblings, everyone argued about who got the good side of the fan. Box fans, oscillating fans, those tiny desk ones, you tried them all. Sometimes you even tried stacking them, one pointing in, one pointing out. Genius in theory. Today, air conditioning is a click away. Back then, you just laid still, listened to that fan hum, and told yourself, it is not that hot. Pogo balls, or Lolo balls, depending on your playground, were like space hoppers, and balance boards had a weird, wobbly baby. It looked like a rubber ball trapped inside a plastic disc. You stood on it. You bounced. That was the whole thing, and it was way harder than it looked. Kids made it look easy in commercials, zooming around like superpowered Pogo ninjas. But in real life, you got on. You bounced twice. You fell. Your ankle hurt. And then you tried again, because when it worked, it felt amazing. You could spin, hop, and coast along the sidewalk like a retro superhero. Kids would show off by bouncing in place or trying to launch over curbs. Sometimes it ended in scraped knees. Sometimes it ended in glory. Pogo balls were short-lived, slightly dangerous, and totally worth it. Every bounce felt like flying, until it did not. Puka shell necklaces were your ticket to island cool, even if the closest beach was a kiddie pool in the backyard. These little white shell fragments were strung together and worn by teens across the country like they just got back from a week of surfing in Oahu. Never mind they lived in Ohio. The puka shell did not care. You could have never seen the ocean and still pull off the look. They felt exotic, even though they were sold 3 feet from the Orange Julius stand. You wore one to the skating rink and felt like a cast member from Hawaii 5-0. Even gym teachers wore them on field day, paired with socks and sandals. They snapped easily, but no one cared. You just bought another. For about 6 months, puka shells had more social currency than your GPA. In fact, most people never saw the ocean. They just saw the necklace on a friend of a cousin who said it helped his vibes. Boys wore them with open shirts and sun-bleached hair. Girls wore them stacked with friendship beads. Either way, if you had one on, you were chill. At least in theory. They were sold everywhere. Surf shops, head shops, mall kiosks. They went with flared jeans, platform sandals, and every kind of tan, fake or real. The puka shell said, "I am easygoing, but I could win a beach volleyball tournament if needed." For a minute there, these necklaces were a fashion must-have, even if the shells dug into your collarbone every time you bent forward. Totally worth it. In the 1970s, science and superstition went on a very weird date. That is how we got pyramid power. The idea was simple. Pyramids, like the ones in Egypt, had special energy, and if you wore a pyramid-shaped hat, or even slept under a cardboard pyramid, you could harness that cosmic force. What kind of power, you ask? Sharper razor blades, better meditation, preserved fruit. Some even believed it could relieve headaches or give psychic visions. Suddenly, pyramid kits were being sold in catalogs. People built pyramid frames in their living rooms. They meditated under them like spiritual Wi-Fi routers. It was not a joke, it was serious. Yogurt companies got in on it. Health stores displayed fruit under plastic pyramids to keep it fresh. Celebrities swore by them. And for a while, so did your neighbor who wore sandals year-round. Nobody could quite explain how it worked, but nobody wanted to be left out of the future. The whole trend was equal parts mysterious and absurd. But in a decade obsessed with expanding your mind and saving your soul, it somehow fit right in. Who needs logic when you have angles? Limited access to new technology made you feel like the world was always 2 steps ahead. Your television had knobs, not remotes. Your family's microwave, if you had one, was the size of a suitcase. You watched classmates bring calculators to school while you still did math by hand. Video game consoles? Maybe you got one, years after everyone else, and only if it was on sale or bought secondhand. Computers were something you read about, or saw once in a library. Other kids talked about digital watches and camcorders. You had a cassette player that chewed up your favorite tape. But you learned to live without. You taped broken things, reused old gadgets, asked for help at the electronics counter, and prayed something worked. And even if your stuff was clunky, slow, or already outdated, it still felt like magic when it turned on. Because having less did not mean you cared less. It meant you valued it more. You made it last. You treated it like treasure. And you watched the future arrive through dusty screens and static buzz. New technology passed you by sometimes, but what you had still lit up your world. Nothing said fancy night like a foil tray full of mystery food. TV dinners were the ultimate poor kid luxury. You got a tray, compartments, and maybe even a tiny brownie in the corner. But heating them was a gamble. The mashed potatoes boiled over while the meatloaf stayed frozen in the center. You had to guess which corner to poke holes in or risk a microwave explosion. And once the edges of the tray started to curl, you knew it was done enough. No matter how uneven it cooked, you still ate every single bite, even the rubbery peas. That little brownie? Always undercooked, but somehow the best part. You followed the instructions, but still ended up with molten potatoes and frozen meat. You stabbed the plastic with a fork like it owed you money. And every corner of that tray had a different temperature zone. Sometimes the peas were ice cubes. Sometimes the meat turned into charcoal, but you ate it anyway, blowing on one bite and chipping your tooth on the next. There was always gravy. always. It covered everything like a bad decision you could not take back. But the novelty? Unmatched. Sitting in front of the television with your own tray, pretending to be in a commercial, it was priceless. Even if it burned your tongue and your trust. Mini troll dolls with neon hair were like little gremlins of joy that somehow took over desks, lockers, and entire childhoods. They were small enough to fit in your pocket, weird enough to creep out your grandma, and magical enough to be lucky, at least according to playground mythology. You were not really sure what they were, but you had to have one, then 5, then a whole army. That neon hair, bright pink, lime green, electric blue, stood up like a flame, just daring the world to look away. You would twirl it, braid it, or trim it just a little, instantly regretting it when you realized it never grew back. These trolls came dressed or naked. Some had glittery bellies and others just sat wide-eyed like they had seen things. Some were pencil toppers, others were keychains. But the best ones were so small they felt secret, like a charm only you knew about. Kids gave them as gifts, swapped them like currency. Sometimes they even brought them along to big tests for luck, as if a 2-inch troll with purple hair could solve algebra. But somehow, it helped. And if you had a troll collection lined up on your bedroom shelf, you knew peace. They looked like creatures from another planet, but they made your little world feel more fun. Maybe it was the hair, maybe it was the eyes, maybe it was just the 80s doing what it did best, turning the weirdest things into absolute gold. Novelty. Ice cubes with bugs inside were the peak of 1970s practical jokes. You dropped one in your uncle's drink and waited. The plastic spider slowly bobbed to the surface, and so did a scream. These things were sold as hilarious gag items, but mostly just made people paranoid every time they saw a glass of soda. The bugs always looked wet, which made it 10 times worse. They floated in just the right way to catch your eye after your first sip. Siblings used them for psychological warfare all summer long. Some kids froze actual plastic roaches into homemade cubes for maximum terror. No one ever trusted fruit punch again, and that was part of the fun. They came in kits with rubber vomit and fake dog poop. Some had fake flies, others had spiders so realistic they made your aunt throw her drink across the room. That was the whole point. You were not trying to be classy. You were trying to be funny. Even if it meant cleaning up Sprite off the shag carpet. Every novelty shop sold them. Some vending machines had them right next to candy. Parents pretended to be annoyed, but they laughed too. It was the 1970s. If your cousin didn't try to poison your fruit punch with a fake roach, were you even really at a family barbecue? You did not need a toy chest when you had a couch. Just rip the cushions off, throw a blanket over the top, and boom, you were in a castle, spaceship, or post-apocalyptic bunker. Couch forts were indoor magic, created out of boredom and budget. Some forts even had rooms, one for snacks, one for sleeping, and one that was always just someone hiding with a flashlight. The more pillows you stole from around the house, the stronger the walls. Someone always crawled in and kicked the roof down, and someone always cried, but it got rebuilt, stronger every time. You decorated with couch throws and whatever stuffed animals were lying around. If you had a working flashlight and a peanut butter sandwich, it might as well have been a mansion. The cushions smelled like feet and popcorn. You used old towels for a roof and held them down with soup cans. And heaven help you if your dad came home and wanted to sit down. Your fort had no rules. The floor was lava. The doorway was a blanket flap. You brought snacks inside and called it a kitchen. You hid there during arguments. You camped there during cartoons. That little cave of fabric and stuffing was your escape. You had no Legos, no Nintendo, no dollhouse. But you had imagination. And a lumpy couch from the 1970s. And honestly, what else did you need? Slap bracelets were banned in classrooms faster than teachers could say, "Cut it out." But before that, oh, they were glorious. Every kid had at least one, and you could hear them everywhere. Snap. That unmistakable crack against your wrist was the sound of pure 1980s rebellion. They looked like fabric-covered rulers, which is exactly what they were. bent into a springy coil that clung to your arm like a clingy friend. The colors were neon, the patterns were chaotic. Animal prints, lightning bolts, checkerboards, you name it. You'd swap them with friends or show off your collection like it was fine jewelry. But here's the thing, they were not safe. The cheap ones from discount bins would split open, revealing jagged metal underneath. Kids still wore them. We did not care. Slap bracelets were cool, and that was enough. Schools freaked out. Letters got sent home. But nothing beat that satisfying slap as the bracelet curled instantly around your wrist like magic. It felt like owning a toy, accessory, and status symbol all in one thin strip. And even if they left tiny bruises or drew blood now and then, we wore them with pride until they quietly disappeared. Still, admit it, just hearing about them makes you want to slap one on right now. Shiny nylon short shorts for men were not a suggestion. They were an epidemic. You saw them everywhere: backyards, gyms, 4th of July barbecues. They were so short they could pass as a belt if the wind blew. Usually bright red or electric blue, always tight. No one wore them casually, they were a choice. You had to commit. They squeaked when you walked, rode up when you sat down, and reflected the sun like a signal flare. Some had stripes on the sides. Others had waistbands that went up to the ribcage. Dads wore them with tube socks and tank tops that said things like Grill King. Uncles mowed the lawn in them. Coaches barked orders in them while their thighs lit up like warning lights. You could see a tan line and a regret line at the same time. And yet, somehow, they became iconic. People look back and laugh, but deep down, they remember how cool they thought they looked. The 1970s were fearless, and no fabric feared exposure less than shiny nylon. Limited or no access to personal telephones meant communication was never guaranteed. In some homes, there was only one phone for everyone, mounted to the kitchen wall with a long, tangled cord and a rotary dial that made even quick calls feel like a task. You waited your turn. You whispered your conversations with one hand covering the receiver. If the bill got too high, it was cut off. Simple as that. In other homes, there was no phone at all. You walked to the corner store and used the payphone with a pocket full of dimes. Sometimes you called collect. Sometimes you asked someone else to make the call for you. Emergencies became logistical puzzles. Job opportunities were missed because there was no way to call back. School events were forgotten because the message never made it through. Friends with their own phones lived in a different universe, where connection was constant and convenience was normal. But for you, every call had weight. Every ring had meaning. And when someone picked up, it mattered more than it should have, because the line might have been shared. But the stories, the check-ins, and the whispered "I'm okays" were always personal. You never bought Tupperware, you reused. And the king of all containers? Cool Whip tubs. That white plastic bowl with the blue lid held leftovers, soup, rice, buttons, or maybe just mystery food from 3 weeks ago. You opened the fridge and saw a dozen Cool Whip labels, but only one actually had whipped topping inside. Every time someone brought food to a party, there was a 50% chance it came in a Cool Whip tub. You labeled the lids with a marker that immediately rubbed off, and you could never find the right lid when you needed it. Some families got fancy and used Country Crock margarine tubs. Either way, they were stackable, practically indestructible, and had zero microwave safety. You knew not to put it in the microwave unless you wanted melted plastic stew. But it worked. And if you lost one, who cared? It was disposable, but not really. Moms had drawers full of them like prized heirlooms, and you never threw one out unless you wanted a lecture. Back then, reusing containers was not trendy. It was survival. If you have ever heard a duck sing in falsetto, then you already know too much. Disco Duck was a 1976 novelty song performed in a Donald Duck voice, and it hit #1 on the charts. Yes, a duck, doing disco, and people loved it. It played at school dances, skating rinks, house parties. You could not escape its quack-fueled funk. The guy behind it, Rick Dees, was a radio DJ who accidentally created the most delightfully absurd hit of the decade. The song had dance moves. The duck had fans, It was bizarre and brilliant all at once. And honestly, it made total sense in the 1970s. This was a time when a talking frog could sell coffee and a grown man in a polyester suit could be a sex symbol. A disco duck was just part of the natural order. Kids sang it, adults danced to it, and no one questioned why a feathered voice was narrating their nightlife. It was catchy, it was camp, and it was exactly what the world needed in a decade that thrived on weird. The best part? You can still find the record in vintage shops like a tiny piece of audio chaos waiting to quack again. Using public libraries for entertainment was not just a pastime, it was a lifeline. When money was tight and options were few, the library was the one place where everything was free. Books lined the shelves, worn from years of use, spines softened by hundreds of hands. You checked out mysteries, adventures, how-to guides, anything to take you somewhere else. Some kids went there after school to read. Others just stayed to stay warm in winter or cool off in summer. The smell of old pages, the whisper of shuffling feet, the clack of the date stamp, it became familiar, even comforting. You learned to treat borrowed books like gold. Late fees were avoided at all costs. Librarians became gatekeepers of imagination, pointing you towards stories you would never afford on your own. There were movies too, old VHS tapes you could borrow for the weekend, and story time for little ones, community events in the back rooms. Sometimes it felt like the library was the only place that wanted you there, no questions asked. In a world of no, it was a yes, a sanctuary made of words and light, and for families with little, it gave them something no money could buy: access. The Gong Show was weird, wild, and wonderful. And so were the Halloween costumes it inspired. If you do not remember, it was a talent show where being bad was half the point. Contestants performed bizarre acts until a panel of judges literally banged a gong to cut them off. Naturally, people took inspiration from this chaos and turned it into October brilliance. Rubber chickens? Yes. Cheap wigs? Absolutely. Costumes made entirely of aluminum foil and glitter? You bet. The best Gong Show costumes were DIY masterpieces that barely made sense but somehow worked. One year you were a human kazoo. The next, you wore 20 sunglasses and called yourself Disco Eyeball. There was no rule book, just cardboard, tape, and questionable judgment. You saw these at school parades, office parties, and costume contests where the prize was a bag of candy and eternal respect. Kids got in on it too, even if they did not understand the show. Parents laughed, teachers winced. The whole thing felt like performance art without the tuition. It was silly, it was surreal, and it was the most fun Halloween had in a long time. Frankie Says Relax shirts were the loudest way to say something you barely understood but totally loved. If you were around in the 1980s, chances are you saw at least one kid walking around in this oversized block-lettered slogan tee like it was a personal manifesto. It was pop culture, it was rebellion, and most of us had no clue who Frankie was. The band Frankie Goes to Hollywood had a hit song, sure, but the shirt took on a life of its own. It was banned in some schools. Parents thought it was suggestive. That made kids want it even more. You did not even have to like the music. The phrase alone was enough to make you feel cool. The shirt was always a bit too big, always bold, and always a little daring. If you saw someone wearing one, you just assumed they were funnier, cooler, maybe even older. And if you wore one yourself, you felt unstoppable. Frankie Says Relax was not just a catchphrase. It was a mood, one that said, I get it, even if you really, really did not. Fuzzy steering wheel covers were part decoration, part thermal hazard. If you wanted your car to look groovy and feel like a teddy bear's paw at 10 and 2, this was your moment. They came in neon pink, electric blue, lava lamp swirl, leopard print, or shag so long it looked like your steering wheel had hair. Putting one on was like fitting a pair of bell-bottoms around a bagel. They never went on smoothly, and when they did, your horn was never quite the same again. In summer, they turned your hands into oven mitts. In winter, they froze and turned into woolly rings of regret. Still, you loved it. because nothing said cool ride quite like gripping a puffball of questionable material that shed like a nervous dog. The matching trend was fuzzy dice on the rearview mirror, maybe a bead curtain in the back window. And if you were really living the dream, you had fuzzy seat covers too. All of it baking in the sun while you told your friends how sweet your ride was. These things never lasted long. They unraveled. They stank after a while. But that was fine. By the time they were falling apart, you had probably moved on to bumper stickers and air fresheners shaped like peace signs anyway. Frequent moves or housing instability meant you never got too comfortable. Just when you started to settle in, the boxes came back out. New schools, new streets, a different room, if you had one at all. Sometimes you moved in the middle of the night, sometimes with a borrowed truck. You left friends behind, teachers, pets even. You learned how to pack fast, how to blend in, how to stay quiet and observe before speaking. Rent went up, jobs disappeared. Family members moved, and you moved with them. You slept on floors, couches, sometimes in motels. Home was a loose term, more about who was there than what it looked like. At school, you kept your head down. You did not decorate your locker, you stopped memorizing addresses, and when someone asked where you were from, you paused, because there was no short answer. But through it all, you kept going. You adapted. You figured out how to rebuild again and again. And every time you unpacked that last box, even if it was just for a few months, you called it home. Because you had to. Because that is how you survived. If these blasts from the 1970s made you laugh, share the funniest memory you still remember in the comments. Give this video a like to keep the nostalgia rolling. And subscribe so you never miss another trip back to the quirks of the past.